Chapter 1. The Invitation Part 1. A glittering world. Camille Armitage's life was everything she had ever dreamed of. At 25, she had beauty, wealth, and the admiration of everyone in high society. Engaged to Ethan Blackwood, a charming businessman whose family owned half of the city's luxury hotels. Camille seemed to have it all. The couple was often seen together at lavish charity events, their smiles bright and perfect as the flashes of cameras captured their every move. But beneath the shimmering surface of her perfect life, Camille couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. There was a strange restlessness in her, a sense that she was caught in a gilded cage. The luxury, the parties, the adoration, none of it truly filled the emptiness inside her. She had spent her youth chasing after the approval of others. But now, as she prepared for her upcoming wedding to Ethan, something felt off. It was at a grand gala hosted by one of Ethan's business associates that Camille first encountered the letter. It arrived unexpectedly, slipping under the door of her private suite in the middle of the night. She had no idea who it was from or how it had found its way into her hands, but the contents were simple yet chilling. Ethan Blackwood is not who he claims to be. Look beyond the facade. If you value your life, you must uncover the truth before it's too late. The letter was unsigned, but the words burned in Camille's mind. The calm certainty with which it was written made her question everything she thought she knew about her fiancé. It was impossible to ignore. For days, Camille couldn't shake the feeling of paranoia that crept into her thoughts. Ethan, who had always been so reassuring, so loving, was he hiding something? She tried to dismiss the letter as the work of an overzealous fan, or perhaps someone with a vendetta, but doubt began to cloud her vision. The next day, as she was getting ready for a lunch with friends, Camille ran into her old college friend, Clara Winters. Clara, once a promising artist, had faded into the background after a failed relationship and a string of bad investments. She had always been a little too independent, a little too unbothered by the social niceties that Camille thrived in. But Clara had a sharp mind, and Camille trusted her instincts. After a few drinks, Camille found herself revealing the contents of the mysterious letter to Clara. Clara's face went pale as she listened. "I've never trusted Ethan," Clara said, her voice low and guarded. "He's too smooth, Camille, too perfect. People like him have a way of hiding things, dark things. You need to ask the right questions." Camille's stomach tightened. "I don't know if I can believe it," Camille whispered. "He's everything I've ever wanted." "Clara, he's kind, generous, thoughtful. He's perfect." Clara looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and resignation. "Perfection is an illusion. Camille, you've built your life around it. But what happens when that perfect image starts to crack?" Camille didn't have an answer. The questions that had been gnawing at her heart for weeks were now impossible to ignore. But she couldn't let go of her life, her engagement, her perfect future, could she? Part 2. The Mysterious Guest. The following evening, Camille attended another event, this one even grander than the last. It was a gala celebrating one of Ethan's successful mergers, a night filled with the elite of the city. As she walked into the ballroom, her mind still heavy with Clara's words, Camille tried to put her doubts aside. She needed to enjoy this night, this life. But when she entered the grand hall, something unexpected happened. Ethan was speaking with a man she didn't recognize, his back to her. The man was dressed impeccably, with sharp features and an air of confidence that stood out among the crowd. Ethan laughed at something the man said, and when he turned, Camille froze. The man was looking directly at her, his eyes dark and knowing, as if he had been waiting for her. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was knowing, almost mocking. Camille felt a chill run down her spine. There was something unsettling about him. Ethan noticed her hesitation and quickly excused himself, walking over to her with a smile. "Camille, darling, you look stunning as always. I was just introducing you to our new business partner, Victor Leclerc. Victor, this is Camille, my fiancé." Victor's smile never faltered, but Camille felt a shiver as he extended his hand. His grip was firm, his fingers cold. "A pleasure to finally meet you." "Camille," he said, his voice smooth and deliberate. The way he said her name unsettled her further, but she managed to force a smile. "The pleasure's mine," she replied, before quickly turning to Ethan. "I think I'll go get some air." "Of course," Ethan said, his voice filled with concern. "Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine, just a little overwhelmed," she said with a forced smile. "I'll be right back." As Camille stepped onto the balcony, the cool night air hit her face, and she closed her eyes for a moment, trying to shake off the strange feeling Victor had given her. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her, and when she turned, Ethan was there, his face filled with worry. "Camille, what's wrong?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something about him." "Ethan? Victor Leclerc? There's something about him I can't trust." Ethan frowned, stepping closer to her. "Victor is one of my oldest friends. Camille, I know him better than anyone. You've got to trust me on this." But Camille couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The unease gnawed at her, growing stronger with every passing second. Victor's presence had been unsettling, but even more so was Ethan's reaction to her doubts. He seemed almost too eager to dismiss them. As she looked out over the city lights, Camille felt a shift inside her, a sense that her perfect world was about to unravel. The questions she had been avoiding were starting to surface, and there was no turning back. Chapter 2: Unraveling the Truth. Part 1: The Search for Answers. The night after the gala, Camille couldn't sleep. The images from the evening, the strange encounter with Victor Leclerc, the unease that simmered beneath her interactions with Ethan circulated through her mind like a storm. She stared at the ceiling of their shared suite, trying to piece together the fragmented puzzle that had once seemed so perfect. Victor Leclerc's presence still lingered, like a shadow in her thoughts. There was something about his calculated smile and that cold, too knowing look that unsettled her. Ethan's dismissive attitude toward her concerns only made things worse. Why was he so eager to push her doubts aside? Camille knew she needed answers, and to get them, she would have to dig deeper into Ethan's past. The life she had built with him, the wealth, the status, The fairy tale engagement was becoming a carefully constructed facade, but what was hidden behind it? Determined to uncover the truth, Camille decided to visit Clara Winters, who had been warning her for weeks. Clara had always been able to see through people with an uncanny clarity, and maybe, just maybe, she could shed some light on what Camille was overlooking. The following day, Camille drove to Clara's small, modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. Clara had become somewhat of a recluse after her tumultuous breakup years ago, retreating from high society and living a life of quiet observation. When Camille arrived, Clara was sitting by the window, sipping coffee. Her sharp eyes studied Camille as she entered, almost as if she had been expecting her. "You're wondering if I was right, aren't you?" Clara asked, not looking up from her cup. Camille nodded, her throat tight. "I don't know what to think anymore. Ethan, he's not the man I thought he was." Clara placed her coffee down and looked at Camille, her face serious. "Ethan's involvement with Victor Leclerc isn't a coincidence. You need to understand that. There's a dark side to his world, Camille. A side that doesn't just involve business deals and investments." "What do you mean?" Camille's voice was barely a whisper. Clara's gaze darkened. "Victor Leclerc is a part of something much larger. There's an underground network of powerful people, wealthy elites, criminals, politicians. They call themselves the Shadow Circle. It's a secret society that controls everything. Ethan has been involved with them for years." Camille's breath caught in her chest. The Shadow Circle. The name sounded ominous, and it fit the unease she had felt from the moment she first met Victor. But how could Ethan, someone she trusted, someone she loved, be a part of something so dark? Clara leaned forward, her voice low. "The Shadow Circle is not just about money, Camille. It's about control, the kind of power that can make or break entire nations. Ethan's involvement with them, it goes deeper than you can imagine." Camille felt the ground shift beneath her. "How do you know all of this?" Clara hesitated before speaking again, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. "Because I was once part of it, too." Part 2. The Web of Deceit. Camille sat frozen, her mind spinning. Clara's revelation had stunned her, but as she watched her old friend, something in Clara's eyes told her that this was no joke. Clara had been part of the secretive world Camille had just stumbled into, and now she was telling her things she didn't want to hear. "I had to get out," Clara continued, her voice a mixture of regret and bitterness. "I saw the way it changed people. I saw what they were capable of. Ethan may seem like the perfect man, but he's just as much a puppet as the rest of them. They all are." "But why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Camille asked, struggling to understand. "I've been engaged to him for months. Why didn't you warn me about this before?" Clara's face softened with a touch of guilt. "I didn't want to believe it either. When I left the Shadow Circle, I tried to forget everything, tried to bury it. But once I saw you getting closer to Ethan, I couldn't stay silent any longer. I knew he was just as deep in as I had been." Camille felt a cold wave of dread wash over her, her life, her love for Ethan. Everything she had thought was real had been a lie. She tried to wrap her mind around what Clara was saying. The Shadow Circle wasn't just a group of rich criminals. They were pulling the strings of the very world Camille had once envied. "I have to stop this," Camille whispered, more to herself than Clara. Clara nodded. You're already involved, whether you want to be or not, but you can still get out. There are people who are trying to take down the circle. There's a way to bring them down, Camille, but it won't be easy. You'll have to be willing to sacrifice everything. I don't care about the money or the power, Camille said, her voice shaking with determination. I want to know the truth. I want to take them down. Clara looked at her for a long moment before nodding. Then you'll have to be smart. The shadow circle has eyes everywhere. One wrong move, and it could be the end of everything. Trust no one, not even Ethan. Part 3. The First Move. Camille spent the next few days in a whirlwind of confusion and determination. She couldn't go back to the life she had known. Everything she had built with Ethan, every promise and dream, felt tainted by the revelations Clara had shared with her. But Camille couldn't give up. The truth was out there, and she was going to find it no matter the costs. She began by revisiting the documents Clara had shown her, studying them for any connection to Ethan. Clara had given her a list of names, members of the Shadow Circle, and hidden in the corners of the files were references to secret meetings, codes, and alliances. Camille's mind raced as she sifted through the pages, searching for anything that would reveal Ethan's true role in this dark network. Then, one name caught her eye, Vincent Leclerc. Camille's breath caught in her throat. Could it be possible? Could Vincent, the man she had met at the gala, be tied to the Shadow Circle? The same Vincent who had made her skin crawl, she needed to confront him. Camille made a decision. She would go to him, face him directly, and get the answers she needed. If Vincent was involved in Ethan's secrets, he was the key. But as she prepared for her meeting, a nagging feeling settled in her gut. Was she walking into a trap? And if she did confront Vincent, what would she do with the truth once she had it? Camille knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change forever. The Shadow Circle would stop at nothing to protect their secrets, and she was now a part of their dangerous game. Chapter 3. The Masked Ball. Part 1. A Night of Shadows. The night of the masked ball arrived, and with it, Camille's sense of unease and anticipation. The grand event, hosted by an anonymous benefactor, was the perfect opportunity for her to find answers, or at least uncover more clues about the Shadow Circle and its hold over Ethan. The lavish setting, filled with glittering chandeliers and opulent decorations, stood in stark contrast to the dark secrets lurking beneath the surface. Camille arrived at the venue in a stunning black gown, her face obscured by an intricate mask. The delicate lace covering her features just enough to ensure her anonymity. The invitation had been cryptic, and the excitement of the night felt almost palpable. The ballroom was alive with music, laughter, and the quiet murmur of conspiratorial whispers. But Camille's mind was far from the glamour of the evening. She was here for one reason: to uncover the truth. The invitation had been sent directly to her, but strangely, Ethan hadn't mentioned it. It was as if he hadn't even known about it. Camille's suspicions were rising by the second. Was this another secret he was hiding? Another piece of the puzzle she hadn't yet uncovered? As Camille stepped into the ballroom, her eyes scanned the crowd. The faces around her were familiar yet distant, wealthy businessmen, high-profile socialites, and influencers whose names she had only heard in passing. There were rumors, of course, of powerful people connected to the shadow circle attending these events, but they never revealed themselves openly. The game of shadows required masks, and everyone wore theirs well. Camille moved gracefully through the crowd, her nerves tightening with every passing second. She was searching for one person, Victor Leclerc. If he was truly involved with the shadow circle, then tonight might be her best chance to get some answers. She had to confront him. She spotted him standing near the far corner of the room, talking to a group of influential guests. His tall, imposing figure stood out among the crowd, his mask barely concealing the coldness in his eyes. He seemed to be the center of attention, his every word hanging in the air like an invisible thread. Camille felt a chill run through her, but she pushed forward. She had come here for answers, and she wouldn't leave without them. Part 2. The Face Behind the Mask. As Camille approached, Victor turned and locked eyes with her. His lips curled into a slow, knowing smile, and for a moment, Camille felt as though the room had gone still. Time seemed to slow as he excused himself from the group and stepped toward her. "Camille Armitage," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Victor Leclerc," Camille replied, her voice calm despite the turmoil swirling inside her. "I thought you might be here." Victor's eyes flickered with something darker. "Did you now? How much do you really know?" "Camille, you've been asking the right questions, but are you ready to hear the answers?" His words sent a shiver down her spine. There it was again, the feeling that he knew far more than he was letting on. Was he playing her, or was he offering her the truth? "I'm not here to play games." "Victor," Camille said, her voice firm, "I want to know what's going on. Who are you really? And why is Ethan involved with you?" Victor chuckled softly, the sound almost amused. "Ethan is a part of something much bigger than you could ever understand. Camille, you've been living in the light, sheltered from the truth, and now you're stumbling into the shadows. But be careful. The darkness isn't so kind to the curious." Camille clenched her jaw. She had to push him, had to break through the wall of cryptic words he was throwing at her. "Tell me the truth," she demanded, her eyes narrowing. "Is Ethan a part of the shadow circle? Are you all just playing me?" Victor's smile faded, and for a brief moment, his mask slipped. The coldness in his gaze was chilling, as if he was weighing the consequences of what he was about to say. "Ethan has always been a part of it," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the sound of the music. "He's been a loyal member for years, just like me. But you, Camille, are different. You're not just a bystander in this game. You've become an integral piece of the puzzle." Camille felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean? What's my role in all of this?" Victor took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The shadow circle doesn't just control wealth and power. It controls people, their destinies, their very lives. You've been marked, Camille. Ethan chose you for a reason. You were never just a socialite. Your bloodline is important. Your involvement is vital to the circle's plans." The weight of his words hit her like a physical blow. Camille stumbled back, her head spinning. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her throat dry. What plans? Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the ballroom, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. His voice dropped even lower. The circle plans to use you, Camille. They have for a long time. They've been watching you, tracking you, waiting for the right moment to pull you into the fold. But you have a choice. You can either become one of them, or you can fight. But be warned, there are consequences to going against them. Camille felt a wave of nausea rise in her chest. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but they were far darker than she had imagined. Ethan, her fiancé, the man she had trusted with her future, was the part of a shadowy network that manipulated and controlled everything she had believed in. "I won't let you control me," Camille said, her voice firm, despite the fear that was clawing at her chest. Victor's smile returned, but this time it was tinged with something else: amusement, perhaps even pity. "You don't have a choice. None of us do." Before she could respond, Victor turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of masked figures. Camille stood there for a long moment, her mind reeling. Everything she thought she knew had been a lie. Ethan, Victor, the shadow circle. They were all tangled in a web of power, manipulation, and deceit, and she had just scratched the surface. But Camille wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She would find the truth, no matter the cost. Part 3. The Decision. After her conversation with Victor, Camille's world seemed to implode. She couldn't go back to her life with Ethan. Not now that she knew the truth. The shadow circle was everywhere, its reach extending into every corner of the world she had once admired from the outside. She had walked into their web unknowingly, and now she was trapped in it. But Camille wasn't someone who ran from danger. She never had been. She would fight back, even if it meant facing Ethan, her fiancé, the man she loved, and exposing the secrets he had hidden from her. The night stretched on, but Camille couldn't stay. She excused herself from the ball, her heart heavy with the weight of the decisions she had to make. The road ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: she couldn't turn back now. The truth would come out, and Camille Armitage would be the one to uncover it. Chapter 4. The Hidden Secrets, Part 1. Unearthing the Past. Camille couldn't shake the words that Victor had whispered to her during the masked ball. "You've been marked, Camille." The phrase echoed in her mind, as if it were a curse she could not escape. She had always been a part of something larger, something darker. But how could that be? She had lived a life of privilege, free from the kind of danger Victor described. As the days passed, Camille grew more determined to uncover the truth about Ethan, Victor, and the shadow circle. She couldn't allow herself to be swept up in their manipulative web any longer. She had to find out what they were truly planning and how she fit into their schemes. Clara had told her that she needed to be careful, that trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Ethan had kept secrets from her, but now she had to dig into the past, both her own and his. Camille spent hours poring over the documents Clara had shared with her, studying the cryptic messages and references to the shadow circle. But the more she read, the more questions arose. Camille knew there was something about Ethan's family that she didn't fully understand. He had always been protective of his past, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that something important was hidden in the Blackwood estate. She needed to go deeper into Ethan's world, to find answers where they had been buried for so long. One evening, as Camille and Ethan enjoyed a quiet dinner at their estate, she watched him closely, her mind racing with the thoughts of his involvement with the shadow circle, his charm, his ease. It all felt so perfect, but perfection, she was beginning to realize, was the mask that hid the darkest truths. "You've been distant, Camille," Ethan said, noticing the far-off look in her eyes. "Is everything all right?" Camille smiled faintly, forcing her thoughts aside. "I've just been thinking about the wedding," she said. "There's a lot to prepare." Ethan's smile softened. "I know it's a lot, but we'll get through it together. Just focus on enjoying our time before the big day." His words, so gentle, only served to deepen her doubts. Camille knew she couldn't let this go. The wedding, the future, none of it mattered until she uncovered the truth. She excused herself from the table, telling Ethan she was feeling a little tired, and retreated to her study. She stared at the files in front of her again, scanning them for any new detail that might give her a clue. It wasn't long before her eyes landed on a letter buried beneath some old papers. It was a letter from Ethan's father, Alexander Blackwood, dated a decade earlier. The letter was addressed to a man Camille had never heard of, Gordon Voss. She unfolded the letter carefully, reading it with growing curiosity. "I trust you will handle this matter with the utmost discretion. Ethan has proven himself a valuable asset to our cause, but I fear he has not yet fully grasped the extent of our work. Keep him close, but not too close. There are things he is not yet ready to understand." The letter was signed with a symbol that Camille recognized immediately, the same symbol she had seen on the documents Clara had shared. The shadow circle's insignia. Her heart pounded in her chest. The letter confirmed what she had feared. Ethan's involvement with the shadow circle was far deeper than she had imagined. His family had been entangled with them for years, possibly even longer than he had been. And his father, Alexander Blackwood, was a key player in their plans. But there was more. The letter also referenced a Gordon Voss, someone Camille had never heard of. She needed to find out who this person was and why he was so important to the Blackwood family's connection to the Shadow Circle. Part 2. The Ghost of Gordon Voss. The next day, Camille set out to find more information about Gordon Voss. She scoured the estate's archives, asking the staff for any records related to the man. After hours of searching, Camille stumbled upon an old photograph tucked away in the back of a dusty cabinet. It was a black and white photo of a man, dressed in a sharp suit, standing alongside Alexander Blackwood. Behind them, a large, ornate building could be seen in the distance, its architecture cold and imposing. Camille's breath caught as she recognized the structure. It was Kilmorden Castle, the very place where her investigation had first begun. Gordon Voss was connected to the Blackwoods, and somehow his influence was tied to the castle, the very place that had become the focal point of her questions. Why had Voss been involved with Ethan's family, and why had they been so secretive as about his identity? With this new lead, Camille made plans to visit Kilmorden Castle again. She had to confront the past if she was going to understand the present. When she arrived, the place was just as cold and imposing as it had been before. The air was heavy with the weight of centuries of secrets, and Camille felt the tension in her chest tighten with every step she took through the castle's ancient halls. She had been here before, but this time she was searching for answers. She made her way to the castle's library, where she had uncovered so much before. It was in these dark, forgotten corners that Camille found the truth she had been searching for, secrets that were hidden from everyone, even those closest to the Blackwood family. Hours passed as Camille combed through the old, dusty tomes, finding nothing of interest. Just as she was about to give up, a thick, leather-bound book caught her eye. The cover was embossed with the same symbol she had seen in the letter, the mark of the shadow circle. She opened it, and inside, she found detailed accounts of meetings, financial dealings, and connections that spanned the globe. But what caught her attention was a single name: Gordon Voss. Voss wasn't just an ally to the Blackwoods. He had been a founding member of the Shadow Circle, instrumental in shaping its influence and power. The documents revealed that he had played a key role in several high-profile disappearances, including the mysterious deaths of individuals who had crossed the Shadow Circle's path. The more Camille read, the clearer it became Gordon Voss had been involved in everything. And now, his influence had reached into Ethan's life and Camille's own. Part 3. A confrontation with the past. With the information she had gathered, Camille returned to the Blackwood estate. Her mind was made up. She had to confront Ethan, and she had to do it now. When she arrived, Ethan was in his study, reviewing documents for an upcoming business deal. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening. "Camille, what's wrong? You look pale." "I know about Gordon Voss," she said, her voice steady, despite the emotions swirling inside her. "I know about the Shadow Circle, and I know what your family has been hiding." Ethan's face faltered for a brief moment, his calm demeanor slipping. He stood up and walked toward her, his voice low and controlled. "Camille, you don't know what you're dealing with. The Shadow Circle is not something you can understand. It's not something I can explain to you. I don't care about the explanations." "Ethan," Camille replied, her eyes narrowing, "I care about the truth. And the truth is, you've been lying to me. You've been hiding things from me. And I'm done." Ethan's face hardened. "I did what I had to do. For you. For our future. You wouldn't understand." "I understand more than you think," Camille shot back, her voice shaking with emotion. "You've been part of something dangerous, Ethan. And now, I'm part of it too. But I won't be a pawn in your game anymore." The silence between them was deafening, each of them standing in the heavy weight of the truth that had finally come to light. Ethan's eyes darkened, a mixture of regret and something darker, something Camille couldn't place. "I didn't want you to get caught up in this," he said quietly, "but it's too late now." Camille's heart broke as she realized the depth of Ethan's involvement, and the distance between them seemed wider than ever before. The trust she had once placed in him was shattered. "I'm done," Camille whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't be with you. Not like this." As Camille turned to leave, she felt a strange sense of finality wash over her. The truth had come at a steep cost, but it had set her free. Chapter 5. The Breaking Point. Part 1. The Unraveling. The air in the Blackwood estate felt thicker now, as if the walls themselves were closing in on Camille. The revelation that Ethan had been a part of the shadow circle for so long hung over her like a shroud, suffocating every ounce of peace she once found in the life they had shared. She had told him she was done. But the truth was, she couldn't walk away that easily. There were still pieces of the puzzle she needed to uncover, pieces that were crucial to understanding why Ethan had kept such dangerous secrets from her. Days passed in a haze of sleepless nights and tense conversations with friends and family who noticed the shift in Camille's demeanor, but said nothing. Only Clara seemed to understand the gravity of Camille's situation, offering quiet support while still cautioning her about the danger she was in. But even Clara's warnings couldn't stop Camille from diving deeper into Ethan's past. She had begun to feel like a detective in her own life, examining every detail with a sharp eye, tracing connections between Ethan's childhood, his family's business dealings, and the powerful people tied to the shadow circle. It was in the early hours of a cold morning that Camille stumbled across an old family photograph hidden in one of Ethan's private drawers. She had seen it once before, but this time something caught her eye. In the photograph, Ethan was standing next to his father, Alexander Blackwood. But it was the third figure that made Camille freeze. A young man, barely older than Camille, stood next to them. His face was half hidden in shadow, but the look in his eyes was unmistakable. It was Gordon Voss. She had never seen this photo before. It was clear that Voss had been close to Ethan's family even before Camille had met Ethan. The connections were deeper than she had realized. And then it hit her: Ethan's entire life, every decision, every relationship had been shaped by the shadow circle. From his father's involvement to the people he had chosen to associate with, and now to Camille herself. She wasn't just an innocent bystander. She had been groomed, perhaps without her knowledge, for this very moment. Camille slammed the drawer shut, her mind racing. She couldn't do this on her own. She needed help, someone who understood the inner workings of the shadow circle, someone who knew what Ethan had been involved in. She needed Clara. Part 2. The Crossroads. By the time Camille met with Clara, she was more determined than ever to end this, to free herself from the web she had become trapped in. They met in a quiet cafe on the edge of town, a place far from prying eyes. Camille's heart pounded in her chest as she sat across from Clara, her hands trembling slightly. "You're not going to like this." "Camille," Clara said, her voice grave as she sipped her coffee. "But there's more to this than just Ethan's involvement. The shadow circle has its eyes on you for a reason." Camille frowned, trying to keep the panic at bay. "I already know that. They've been watching me, manipulating me." She hesitated, her voice faltering. "But what do they want from me? Clara, what am I supposed to do with all of this now?" Clara leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "They want control over you. You were never just a socialite in their eyes. Camille, you're a key player. You've been marked because of your bloodline. There's something in your family's past that connects you to the circle." Camille's breath caught. "What do you mean? My family?" Clara looked around to make sure no one was listening. "You're connected to them through your great-grandfather, who was a founding member of the Shadow Circle. You may not know this, but your family's wealth didn't come from inheritance. It came from deals with people who were involved in dark networks. Your great-grandfather was one of them. His ties to the circle go back decades. Camille stared at Clara, disbelief written across her face. How is that possible? Why didn't anyone tell me? Clara shrugged. Because they wanted to keep you ignorant. But now they're going to use you, Camille. And it's not just Ethan they're controlling. It's you, too. Camille shook her head, her thoughts spiraling. She had always known there was something strange about her family's wealth, but this was too much. Her ancestors, her bloodline tangled in a web of power and manipulation. I can't believe this, Camille whispered, the weight of it all crashing down on her. How could I have been so blind? Clara's expression softened with sympathy. You're not alone in this, Camille. You've got me, and there are others who want to see the shadow circle brought down. But you need to be prepared. You can't walk away from this. You have to face them. Camille closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm her racing thoughts. There was no turning back now. She couldn't hide from the truth. Ethan's lies. Her family's dark past, it all led here. She had no choice but to fight. Part 3. The Final Decision. After her conversation with Clara, Camille spent the next few days preparing herself. She knew she couldn't face the shadow circle alone, but she was ready to confront Ethan one last time. The time for secrets and lies was over. When she returned to the Blackwood estate, Ethan was waiting for her, as if he knew this confrontation was inevitable. His face was set in a mask of calm, but there was a wariness in his eyes. Camille, he said softly, standing by the fireplace. I know what you're thinking. You've found the truth, haven't you? Camille stepped into the room, her posture resolute. I've found more than the truth. Ethan, I've uncovered the lies. I know about the shadow circle. I know about your father, your family, and I know about Gordon Voss. Ethan stiffened, his jaw tightening. You don't understand. I never wanted you to be involved. I never wanted to drag you into this. Camille shook her head, the frustration and betrayal bubbling to the surface. You didn't give me a choice. Ethan, I was never given a choice. I've been living in a lie, trusting you, trusting your family, and now I know it was all part of a plan. You don't understand what I've been through, Ethan said, his voice rising. I had no choice but to get involved with them. My father, he didn't give me an option. I don't care about your excuses anymore. Ethan, Camille said, her voice hard. You chose this. And now you're going to face the consequences. Ethan's face faltered, his mask slipping for a moment. Camille, I never wanted to hurt you. I know, she said quietly, but you have. Camille took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was the moment she had been building up, to the moment she would finally break free from the web of lies that had ensnared her. She had uncovered the truth about Ethan, her family, and the shadow circle. Now, it was time to confront the very heart of the conspiracy. I'm leaving. Ethan, she said firmly, I'm done. This isn't the life I want anymore. I can't be part of your world. Not after everything. Ethan's face softened with regret, but there was no stopping the finality in Camille's words. She turned and walked away, leaving behind the life that had once seemed so perfect. The door closed behind her, and Camille felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was free. Chapter 6. The Final Betrayal. Part 1. The Weight of Truth. Camille's steps were heavy as she left the Blackwood estate behind her. The sound of the door clicking shut behind her seemed like the closing of an entire chapter in her life. She had known that confronting Ethan would not be easy, but she hadn't anticipated the emotional weight that would come with the finality of her decision. As she walked through the quiet streets, Camille's mind was a swirl of thoughts. She had uncovered more than she had ever imagined, more lies, more secrets, her life, her family, Ethan. They were all intertwined with the shadow circle in ways she could not yet fully comprehend. The truth, while liberating, had also turned her world upside down. She had always thought she had control of her destiny, but now she realized that the people she trusted most had been playing games with her life. They were not the only ones. She needed to go further. Camille knew that even though she had left Ethan, the real battle was only just beginning. If she was going to destroy the shadow circle, and with it, the influence that had seeped into every facet of her life, she needed to be more than just a passive observer. She needed allies. But who could she trust now? As if reading her thoughts, Camille remembered Clara. Clara was her one true ally. Someone who had warned her of the dangers in Ethan's world from the very beginning. Camille hadn't realized how much she depended on Clara until now. It was Clara who had opened her eyes to the shadow circle. It was Clara who had shown her that she was not helpless in the face of the darkness. With renewed determination, Camille pulled out her phone and called Clara. After a few rings, her voice came through the line, quiet but steady. Clara's voice was filled with concern. "Are you all right?" Camille didn't answer immediately. Instead, she inhaled deeply, taking in the weight of everything that had just transpired. "I'm done, Clara. I've left him. I've left Ethan. I can't live in his world anymore." There was a brief silence before Clara spoke again, this time with a note of quiet approval. "I knew you would make the right choice. But listen, Camille, you're not done yet. You've taken the first step, but there's more to do." "I know," Camille replied, her voice hard with resolve. "But I don't know where to start. The shadow circle is everywhere. How do I even begin to fight them?" "You've already started," Clara said, her tone firm. "But now you need to prepare. You can't fight the shadow circle alone. I've been in touch with a few people who want the same thing you do, an end to their reign. But you need to be careful. We'll need to plan this carefully." Camille nodded, though Clara couldn't see her. "I'm ready. I want to know everything. I'll do whatever it takes." "Good," Clara said. "We'll meet soon. I have a few more pieces of the puzzle to share with you." Part 2. The Hidden Resistance. Camille's meeting with Clara took place in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city, far away from the prying eyes of the shadow circle's influence. Clara arrived early, as usual, her face serious as she greeted Camille. "You look like you've been through hell," Clara said with a small, understanding smile. "Not far from the truth," Camille replied, sitting down across from her. "I feel like I've only just started to understand how deep this goes. It's all tangled up. Clara, Ethan, his family, the shadow circle. They all seem to be working together, and I don't know how to break free. Clara's expression softened with empathy. I know it's overwhelming. It took me years to see it for what it really was. But you're not alone anymore. There are people who've been fighting back against the shadow circle for years. We're going to take them down, Camille, piece by piece. Clara slid a thick folder across the table toward Camille, who immediately opened it. Inside were files, photographs, and documents, each one revealing more about the shadow circle and its reach. Camille flipped through them, each page sending a cold shiver down her spine. The circle has ties to everything, Clara explained. They control the financial markets, they manipulate politics, they silence anyone who stands in their way. It's more than just a group of wealthy individuals. It's a global network with its roots in the highest levels of power. And what do we do about it? Camille asked, her voice steady, despite the fear she felt. How do we fight this kind of power? Clara leaned in, her eyes intense. We hit them where it hurts. They think they control everything, but they're vulnerable. Camille, we start by exposing their weakest links. We gather evidence, allies, and we cut off their sources of power. Camille nodded, her resolve hardening. I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes. Let's take them down. Clara gave her a small, approving smile. Good. You're not the same woman who came to me weeks ago, but you have to be careful. Ethan, he's not just going to let this go. He's deeply involved in this. And once he realizes what you're doing, he'll stop at nothing to protect the circle. You need to stay one step ahead. Part 3. The final plan. For the next several weeks, Camille worked tirelessly with Clara and a small but dedicated group of allies who had been tracking the shadow circle for years. They communicated in secret, meeting in hidden locations, always watching their backs. Each day brought new information, new pieces of the puzzle, but also new dangers. One night, as they sat in a safe house hidden away in the city, Clara unfolded the final pieces of their plan. We have one shot at this, she said, her voice serious. We go after the circle's leadership. Their most powerful members, those who control everything. Camille leaned in. How do we get to them? Clara spread out a map of key locations, each marked with the names of circle members and their properties. We start by infiltrating their financial systems. We hack into their private accounts, expose their connections to the public. We use everything they've hidden to turn the tables. And what about Ethan? Camille asked, her voice quieter. What if he's still in the dark? What if he's part of it? Clara's eyes softened, but she didn't pull back. If he's still loyal to them, then we'll have to deal with him. But you can't let your feelings for him cloud your judgment. Camille, this is bigger than you and him. The words hit Camille like a slap. She had known that this moment would come, that she would have to choose between love and justice, between the man she had loved and the greater good. But for the first time, Camille felt a surge of clarity. She wasn't the woman she had been. She wasn't the naive socialite caught in a web of deceit. She was stronger now, and she would do what was necessary. I'm ready, Camille said, her voice firm. Let's bring them down. Epilogue. A new beginning. The plan went into action swiftly. Camille, Clara, and their allies launched a series of coordinated strikes against the Shadow Circle, targeting their financial networks, political influence, and personal connections. With each move, Camille felt herself stepping further into a world of darkness, but also one of empowerment. As the circle's hold began to crumble, Camille found herself face to face with the most dangerous choice of all confronting Ethan. He had been a part of the circle, yes, but Camille had once believed in him. She could not deny the deep conflict she felt when he appeared in front of her, his face both desperate and resolute. But Camille was no longer the woman who would be manipulated or controlled. She had found her own strength, and she knew what had to be done. The final showdown was inevitable, and Camille Armitage would not back down. Chapter 7, The Reckoning, Part 1. The Fall of the Circle. The city was in chaos. The Shadow Circle's empire, built over decades of covert manipulation, was beginning to crumble under the weight of the truth. Camille, Clara, and their small group of allies had launched their final strike, exposing the financial networks that had funded the circle, revealing the dark web of connections that linked the most powerful people in the world. With each leak, with each document made public, the circle's grip on the city weakened. The power they once held, so tight and absolute, was now slipping through their fingers. For Camille, this was the culmination of everything she had fought for. Her life had been turned upside down by the lies of the man she loved, and now she was part of the movement to bring down the very organization that had manipulated them both. Every step she took in this dangerous game was one step closer to destroying the Shadow Circle. But she knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The final confrontation was inevitable. Victor Leclerc, one of the top members of the Shadow Circle, had made his move to silence those who threatened their control. Camille knew he would not go down without a fight. He had been pulling the strings for far too long, and he had one final plan, one that could destroy everything Camille and her allies had worked for. Camille stood at the edge of a precipice. The truth had set her free, but the consequences were only beginning to unfold. As much as she hated to admit it, she knew the only way to truly end this, to sever the Shadow Circle's influence once and for all, was to confront Ethan. He had been the one who had pulled her into this world, who had kept her tethered to a past that now seemed like a nightmare. It was only through him, through his ties to the organization, that she could uncover the final truth. But Ethan had changed. The man she once loved was now just another pawn in a game far bigger than either of them. Part 2. The Final Confrontation. Camille's heart pounded in her chest as she walked into the private room where she and Ethan had shared so many quiet moments. The same room where they had dreamed of a future together, where Ethan had promised her that nothing would ever separate them. The irony was not lost on Camille. Now, she was walking into the room not as his fiancé, but as a force determined to tear down everything he had built. Ethan stood by the window, his back to her, staring out over the city as it glittered beneath the night sky. He had been so sure of his control over her, so certain that his world would remain untouched. But Camille had changed. The truth had set her free, and she would no longer let him dictate the terms of her life. "Ethan," Camille said softly, her voice steady, "we need to talk." He didn't turn around. I know why you're here, Camille. I know you've been digging, but you don't understand what you're up against. You've crossed a line, and now there's no turning back. I've crossed no line, Camille replied, her voice firm. I've found the truth, and I won't let you or your family's secrets destroy everything. Ethan finally turned, his expression cold and hard, as if he were a stranger. You think you're the first person to try and take the shadow circle down. You think you can just destroy everything I've worked for us. He let out a bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. You've been a pawn in this game, Camille. Don't you see that they've been playing you just like they've been playing me? Camille shook her head. No, Ethan, you've been playing me. I trusted you, I loved you, and now I'm done. Ethan stepped toward her, his expression changing from anger to desperation. Camille, please. You don't understand. The circle is bigger than us. It's about power, about survival. You think I chose this life, I did it for us, for our future. Camille backed away, her heart breaking at the man she thought she knew, the man she had once wanted to build a future with. This wasn't for us, Ethan. This was for you. You chose power over everything else, over love, over trust, over me. And now, you have to face the consequences. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of everything between them hanging in the air. Ethan's eyes were filled with regret, but there was no way back. The truth was out, and Camille couldn't unlearn what she had discovered. Do you really think you can destroy the shadow circle? Ethan asked, his voice quiet, almost resigned. I don't think I can, Camille replied, but I'm going to try, and I won't stop until it's over. Ethan's face darkened, his eyes hardening as if he had made a decision. Then I guess it's over for both of us. With those words, he turned away from her again, walking toward the desk that stood in the corner of the room. His hand hovered over a drawer, and for a moment, Camille wondered what he was about to do. But before she could react, he slammed his fist against the desk in frustration. I don't want to hurt you, Camille, he said quietly, his voice breaking. But you're making this impossible. I'm not the one who made it impossible, Camille replied, her voice steady with resolve. You did that when you chose them over me. Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he looked at her for a long, painful moment before turning away. I don't want to fight you anymore. Go. You've made your choice. Camille's heart shattered, but she held her ground. She wasn't walking away this time, not from him, and not from the fight that was bigger than their relationship. She turned and walked out of the room, closing the door behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty halls of the Blackwood estate. It was over. She was free. Part 3. A New Dawn. The days following her final confrontation with Ethan were a blur of action. The shadow circle, now exposed, was scrambling to retain control. With the help of Clara and their growing network of allies, Camille played her part in dismantling the organization. It wasn't easy. The circle fought back with everything they had, spreading misinformation, discrediting their enemies, and using their wealth and power to try and maintain their influence. But Camille was no longer The naive socialite she once was. She was a force to be reckoned with, and every move she made brought the shadow circle closer to its inevitable fall. One evening, as she stood on the balcony of the small, secure apartment she had moved into, Camille watched as the sun set over the city. The last year had been a whirlwind of chaos, but she had survived it. She had fought for the truth, and now she had a future that was hers to shape. The city beneath her was still alive with the pulse of power and influence. But Camille knew she had taken the first step toward freedom. The battle was far from over, but she was no longer alone. She had allies. She had a purpose. And most importantly, she had herself. As the night settled in, Camille felt a sense of peace wash over her. The past was behind her, and though the future was uncertain, she knew one thing for sure: she would never be the pawn again. The shadow circle had fallen, and Camille Armitage was free. Chapter 8. The New World Part 1. Rebuilding the Future. The dust had settled. The shadow circle had been exposed to the world, its vast network of power and influence unraveling at the seams. What had once been an impenetrable fortress was now a house of cards, crumbling under the weight of its own secrets. Camille, standing at the heart of it all, was still trying to process the whirlwind of events that had brought her here. The battle had been fierce, but now, with the shadow circle dismantled, there was no immediate danger. Yet, there was a hollow space inside her, as though the fight for freedom, the fight to uncover the truth, had taken everything she had. Her relationship with Ethan was over, and the love she had once felt seemed like a distant memory, a story she could no longer tell. He had been a part of the circle, just as much as the rest of them. His actions had changed her forever, but she couldn't hold on to that resentment any longer. She had to let it go in order to move forward. But what did the future hold now? The life she had once known was gone, shattered by betrayal and the weight of hidden truths. For the first time in years, Camille had to rebuild everything from the pieces of her identity to the relationships that had once felt so stable. As she sat at her desk, looking out over the city, Camille thought about the people who had helped her, the ones who stood by her side when everything seemed lost. Clara was still her closest ally, someone who had never wavered in her support, even when Camille had made the most difficult decisions. And then there was the small but dedicated group of people who had been working to bring down the shadow circle from the inside. They had risked their lives, their livelihoods, for a cause much greater than any of them. It was time for Camille to find her place among them, not as a pawn in someone else's game, but as a leader in the fight for change. Part 2. A New Purpose. Months passed since the shadow circle's fall. The chaos that followed was expected. Powerful figures had been brought down, their wealth and influence scattered. But as the dust settled, Camille found herself grappling with a different kind of challenge. The world she had fought so hard to change was still in need of healing, and her work was far from over. She had taken steps to expose corruption on a global scale, helping to dismantle the shadow circle's financial network, revealing the extent of its control over key political and economic systems. But that was only one battle. The war for transparency, justice, and accountability had only just begun. As the leader of the movement against the Shadow Circle's remnants, Camille now had a platform. People listened to her. They trusted her. But there was a pressure in that, too. The people who had been part of the resistance were looking to her for guidance. Clara had taught her the importance of building something sustainable, a foundation that could last. Something more than just a fight against a powerful organization. Camille had no illusions about how hard it would be. The wounds of the Shadow Circle's influence ran deep, and it would take more than a few months of exposure to undo the damage done over decades. One afternoon, while walking through the city, Camille found herself in front of the Blackwood estate again. The mansion, still standing as it had when she first arrived, seemed distant and cold. She had come to realize that it wasn't just Ethan or the circle that had shaped her life. It was the choices she made in the aftermath. Standing there now, Camille realized that she was free. Free from the world of power and manipulation. Free from the shackles of her past. With a sense of finality, she turned and walked away from the mansion. This chapter of her life was over. Her mind raced as she walked, the weight of the decisions still ahead of her pressing down on her. She had once been part of that world, the world of privilege, of wealth, of secrets and lies, but now her mission was clear. She was going to fight for a future where the rich and powerful were held accountable. She was going to create a world where justice prevailed, where the truth was the most powerful weapon of all. Uniting the broken pieces, as Camille settled into her new role, she began working with allies from all over the world, activists, journalists, former members of the Shadow Circle who had defected, and even disillusioned business moguls who had helped fund the movement. They had one goal: to create a future where corruption could no longer thrive in the shadows. The road ahead was long, and the resistance she was building needed time to grow. But Camille had hope. She had seen the impact they could make when they worked together, when they shared knowledge and strength. Weeks turned into months, and Camille found herself speaking at global summits, engaging with policymakers, and advocating for the reform of corrupt systems. She became a symbol of resilience, a woman who had been betrayed, but who had turned that betrayal into a force for good. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding. It was about restoring faith in a broken system. Camille understood now that her fight wasn't just against the Shadow Circle. It was for a future where no one had to live in fear of manipulation and control. And through it all, Clara remained by her side. The bond they shared had only grown stronger. Together, they formed a partnership that would serve as the foundation for the movement Camille had set in motion. They were no longer just individuals fighting back. They were a force of change. Part 4. The Legacy of Change. Camille stood on the balcony of a newly established transparency center, overlooking the city she had once felt so disconnected from. The skyline was no longer just a symbol of wealth and power. It had become a symbol of something much bigger, a future built on truth. As she looked out over the city, Camille felt a sense of accomplishment. The Shadow Circle's influence had been cut down to its core, and its hold on the city had been broken. The world she had fought to change was slowly but surely becoming a better place. But there was still work to be done. There would always be those who tried to hide in the shadows, who sought to manipulate and control. Camille knew that her work was far from over. but for the first time in years, she felt at peace. She was doing what she had always wanted to do, fighting for a better world. The sun set behind the city skyline, casting a golden glow over the horizon. Camille's heart swelled with a quiet sense of pride, knowing that she had played a part in changing the course of history. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was ready. The fight had been long, but it was far from over, and Camille Armitage was ready to lead the way. Epilogue: The road ahead. The city, once a symbol of darkness, now stood as a beacon of hope. Camille's journey was not one that would be easily forgotten, but it was one that had changed everything. Her story had become a testament to the power of truth, resilience, and the unyielding spirit to fight for what was right. The Shadow Circle may have been defeated, but there were always new battles to face, new threats to uncover. And Camille Armitage would be there, leading the charge, ensuring that the truth would never again be buried in the shadows. Chapter 9: A New Dawn, Part 1. The Calm After the Storm. It had been a few months since the fall of the Shadow Circle, and while the world had settled into a new rhythm, Camille could still feel the aftershocks of everything that had unfolded. The remnants of the circle's power had scattered, and those who had once been untouchable now found themselves struggling to maintain their influence. Many had fled the country, and those who remained were under constant scrutiny. The city, once a sprawling labyrinth of secrets, had started to transform. New laws were being passed, laws that Camille and her allies had fought for. Transparency, accountability, and justice were now at the forefront of every major conversation. It wasn't perfect, but the foundation had been laid. The real work had only just begun. For Camille, the battle was far from over, but she had found a new sense of peace within herself. The weight of the past no longer hung over her like a dark cloud. Instead, she stood on the precipice of a new life, a life she would forge herself. Part 2. The Return of Old Ghosts. One crisp morning, Camille stood before the window in her office, looking out over the city. The view was beautiful, filled with the promise of a future she had worked so hard to create. But even as she watched the city pulse with life, a shadow flickered in the corner of her mind. It had been weeks since she had seen Ethan. The final conversation they had shared was still fresh in her memory. The harsh words, the finality in the air. Ethan had retreated into the shadows, just as she had expected, but something in Camille's heart lingered. She wasn't sure what it was. Perhaps pity, perhaps remnants of a love that had once been. But she hadn't fully closed the door on him. She was pulled from her thoughts when her phone buzzed on her desk. Camille picked it up, glancing at the name on the screen. It was an unfamiliar number, but something told her it was important. Taking a deep breath, she answered, "Camille Armitage." The voice on the other end was familiar, and it made her blood run cold. "Camille," Ethan's voice crackled through the line. "I need to talk to you." Her heart skipped a beat. She had spent so long shutting him out, building a new life, and now, here he was, reappearing like a ghost from her past. "I'm listening," Camille said, her voice steady, though inside she felt an unsettling mix of emotions. I didn't mean for it to go this way," Ethan continued, his voice filled with an unmistakable hint of desperation. "I never wanted you to be part of all of this, but there's more at stake than you know. The circle. It's not gone. There are factions, people left behind. If we don't act now, everything we've worked for could collapse." Camille's mind raced. "What are you saying?" "Ethan, you can't come to me now. After everything. You think I'm just going to step back into your world after everything you've done?" "I understand why you're angry." "Camille, I know I've hurt you," Ethan said, his voice tinged with remorse. "But I'm asking for your help. The truth, the real truth about the circle. It's bigger than we ever imagined. They have their eyes on you." Camille's pulse quickened. "What do you mean by that?" "They're watching you, Camille," Ethan repeated. "They want to finish what they started. I know what they're planning. Please, we need to work together." The weight of his words sank in. The shadow circle might have fallen, but its ghosts were far from gone. And they wanted Camille to be part of their dark world once again. "I won't go back to that, Ethan," Camille said firmly, her voice resolute. "But I will find out what you're hiding, and I will make sure it ends once and for all." The line went silent for a moment, and Camille could almost hear the tension in the air between them. "You'll regret it," Ethan warned softly, "but I'll be here. When you realize you're not safe, don't come to me for help." With that, the line went dead. Camille stood there, the weight of Ethan's words hanging in the air. She had been free from the lies, free from the manipulation. But now, something more dangerous lurked in the shadows. The shadow circle wasn't truly gone, and Camille had just received a chilling reminder that the fight wasn't over. Part 3. The Unseen Enemy. The weeks following that phone call were filled with an unsettling sense of urgency. Camille knew she couldn't ignore Ethan's warning. The circle might have been exposed, but its remnants were still dangerous, and they were focused on her. She began working tirelessly with her allies, trying to uncover any traces of the circle's remaining factions. Her team of activists, journalists, and former insiders all scoured for information. They had to find out who was still pulling the strings and how they could be stopped. But as she worked, Camille began to notice strange occurrences. She received anonymous threats, subtle warnings that someone was watching her every move. It was as if the circle knew her every step before she made it. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Camille returned to her apartment to find a package waiting for her. There were no signs of a delivery, no name or address on the box. With a sinking feeling in her chest, she opened it. Inside was a single item, a black mask. The same mask worn at the masked ball she had attended, the one that had been the start of everything the night she had met Victor Leclerc. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the message. The shadow circle wasn't finished. It had never truly gone away. And now, Camille was once again at the center of their game. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. Camille knew the time had come to confront the final remnants of the circle, whether she was ready or not. Part 4. The Final Move. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Camille found herself at the heart of the fight once again. She wasn't just trying to stop an organization now, she was trying to end a legacy of manipulation, betrayal, and control. The final battle would not be fought in public, in front of cameras or news outlets. It would be fought in the shadows, where the circle had always operated. Camille would have to infiltrate their hidden networks, expose their last remaining leaders, and cut off their influence once and for all. But this time, she wouldn't be alone. Clara stood by her, just as she had since the beginning. And the rest of the resistance, those who had worked tirelessly to bring down the circle, were ready to join her. The truth was no longer just a weapon. It was a beacon, and Camille would be the one to carry it, to shine a light on the darkness that had once controlled her life. She had started this fight, and she would finish it. Her path was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The shadow circle would no longer hold sway over her or anyone else. Camille had already sacrificed enough. Now, she would bring justice to the shadows and ensure that they never again saw the light of day. Chapter 10. The Heart of the Web. Part 1. The Gathering Storm. Camille sat in a dimly lit room with Clara and their most trusted allies, their eyes scanning the multiple screens before them. They had worked relentlessly for months, piecing together fragments of intelligence, tracking down every trace of the Shadow Circle's remnants. But each time they thought they were close to uncovering the final string, it slipped further into the shadows. The resistance had grown, expanding across cities, infiltrating the financial markets, and securing key information from former members of the Circle. But even with all their progress, Camille knew that there was one last piece of the puzzle. They needed to uncover the identity of the remaining high-ranking leaders who were still pulling the strings in secret. The problem wasn't just about stopping the Shadow Circle. It was about making sure it never returned. This time, Camille knew the battle would be fought in the darkest corners where no light reached, where the Circle could continue to operate without anyone noticing. Victor Leclerc had warned her that the Circle wasn't finished, and his cryptic words echoed in her mind. They will find you when you least expect it. The threat was real. Every decision Camille had made until now had been leading her to this point, the final strike. But Camille had no intention of falling into their trap. She had seen the face of the enemy, and now she was ready to fight back. "This is it," Clara said, breaking Camille from her thoughts. "We've uncovered their last base of operations. If we hit this hard enough, we'll be able to disrupt their remaining influence for good." Camille nodded, determination hardening her expression. "We strike tomorrow." The plan was simple, yet dangerous. They would target one of the Circle's last covert locations, a secret facility located in an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of the city. It was rumored to house the highest-ranking members who had survived the collapse of the Shadow Circle. If they could infiltrate the facility, they would finally expose everything the Circle's most dangerous secrets, the names of its leaders, and, most importantly, their ultimate plan. Camille felt the weight of the moment pressed down on her. This wasn't just about bringing down a criminal organization. It was about stopping a future where corruption and control ruled from the shadows. It was about freedom, but she knew that danger loomed. The moment they moved on this, there would be no turning back. The final confrontation had begun. Part 2. The Infiltration. The night was cold and still as Camille and her team moved into position. Clara, who had been the mastermind behind their infiltration plan, led them toward the mansion's perimeter. The facility was heavily guarded, its rusted gates and towering walls a stark reminder of the dark legacy of the Shadow Circle. "We have a window of about 30 minutes. Clara whispered, checking her watch. Once we're in, we disable the cameras and security systems. Then, we make our way to the central command room. Camille nodded, her focus unyielding. She had to keep her emotions in check. Fear had no place in this mission. They had to be swift, precise, and relentless. As the team moved closer to the mansion's entrance, Camille felt her pulse quicken. There was a sense of finality in the air, a feeling that this was the end of something that had plagued her for so long. The mansion loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, like the last remnant of a crumbling empire. Camille's heart beat in rhythm with the ticking clock each second, drawing her closer to the heart of the shadow circle. They reached the back door, and with a quick swipe of a key card, Clara unlocked it. The door creaked open, and they slipped inside, moving like shadows in the night. The mansion was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the old generators running in the basement. Camille's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and she scanned the hallway. "Stay close," Clara ordered. "We'll split up. The command center is 2 floors up. We'll clear the rooms on the way." As they ascended the narrow staircase, Camille's mind raced. She knew they were running out of time. If they were caught, it would all be over. But this was their only chance to strike at the heart of the circle. At the top of the stairs, Camille felt her hand instinctively reach for the small pistol tucked into her jacket. They hadn't come this far to back down. Not now. They moved through the hallways with careful precision, clearing each room before advancing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the command center. The door was locked, but Clara was quick with the security codes. The door clicked open with a soft, mechanical hum. Inside, the room was bathed in the glow of several computer monitors. The walls were lined with maps, financial reports, and dossiers on key individuals. Camille stepped forward, her breath catching in her throat as she saw a familiar face on one of the screens, Ethan. It wasn't just a passing mention. He was listed as one of the remaining leaders of the Shadow Circle. Camille's stomach churned at the sight. Even now, after everything, he was still entangled in this world. But this wasn't about him anymore. It was about bringing down the entire operation once and for all. Clara moved quickly to the control panel, typing in a series of commands. The monitors flickered, and then the entire room was bathed in red light. I see. "It's done," Clara said, her voice sharp. "The files are copied. We've got everything." But before Camille could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls. The guards were getting closer. "We need to go." Now, Camille hissed. They had done it. They had exposed the circle's remaining leaders and their most dangerous secrets. But the escape was going to be their greatest challenge yet. Part 3. The Chase. The mansion, once silent, was now alive with the frantic sound of security alarms. Camille's heart pounded as she sprinted down the hallway, the weight of the stolen files in her hands. She could hear the shouts of the guards as they realized the breach. "We've been compromised," one of them shouted. "Move faster," Clara urged, her voice full of urgency. "The back exit is just ahead." Camille's legs burned with exertion as they ran, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the hallways. Behind them, the mansion's security team closed in. It wouldn't be long before they were caught. They reached the back door, but just as they were about to slip out, a man stepped into their path, A familiar face. It was Victor Leclerc. I was hoping we'd meet again. Camille, Victor said, his tone laced with amusement. His eyes were cold, calculating. But I'm afraid this is where your journey ends. Camille's pulse spiked as she instinctively stepped forward. I won't let you stop me. Victor smiled, a wicked glint in his eye. You're out of your depth. You think you can take down the shadow circle? You're just a pawn. You always were. Before Camille could react, Victor lunged at her, but Clara was quicker. She stepped in front of Camille, pulling out a hidden weapon and firing a single shot. Victor fell back, clutching his shoulder, a look of surprise on his face. This isn't over. Camille! Victor spat, his voice filled with venom. You can't win. We already have, Clara replied coldly. Securing the door behind them, they ran for the exit, and as they stepped into the cool night air, Camille felt a rush of triumph. The final battle had been won, and the Shadow Circle's last bastion had been destroyed. Part 4. A Future Reclaimed. The next few days were a blur of celebrations and intense discussions. The evidence they had gathered had been released to the public, exposing the remaining leaders of the Shadow Circle, dismantling their operations, and revealing the true extent of their influence. The world was stunned by the revelations, but Camille couldn't feel the satisfaction she had expected. Instead, she felt something else, a strange emptiness. It was over. The circle had fallen. But what was left for her in the months that followed? Camille continued her work. She had started the revolution, but now she had to ensure its success. The world wasn't perfect, and the fight for transparency and justice was ongoing. But Camille was no longer just a victim of the system. She was a force for change. As she stood on the balcony of her new apartment, alone but free, Camille realized that her future was not dictated by the shadows of the past. It was hers to create. The road ahead would not be easy, but she was ready. She had survived the darkness, and now she was ready to lead the way into the light. Chapter 11. The Road Less Traveled to Part 1. The New Power. The dust had settled, but the world Camille had fought to create was not the same as the one she had left behind. The Shadow Circle's remnants had been scattered and dismantled, but Camille had learned a hard truth. There would always be new threats, new forces trying to take control. Power didn't vanish, it adapted, it evolved. The fight for transparency was now global, with new coalitions of activists, business leaders, and politicians seeking to ensure that the cycle of corruption would never repeat itself. Camille had become a key figure in these movements, using her past as leverage to hold the powerful accountable. Her work was far from over, but she could see the potential for a new world, a world built on openness and accountability, where people could no longer be manipulated in the shadows. But even as the world began to change, Camille couldn't escape the nagging feeling that she was still running from a past that would never let her go, from the ghosts of the Shadow Circle that still haunted her every step. Ethan's face, once a symbol of love and trust, had become a symbol of betrayal. Victor's words still echoed in her mind. "You'll regret it, Camille." She had to accept that this was no longer just about the shadow circle or her relationship with Ethan. It was about her future, and the future of everyone who had been manipulated by the forces of corruption. And that meant taking risks. It meant forging alliances in the places she never thought she would. Part 2. A Strange Alliance. One day, Camille received an unexpected call from an old acquaintance, Gordon Voss. The name struck her like a cold shock. Voss had been a key figure in the downfall of the Shadow Circle, and for a long time, she believed he was lost to history, or worse, perhaps dead. But now, he was reaching out to her, and Camille had to wonder why. The conversation was tense. Voss had been one of the founding members of the Circle, but his involvement had always been shrouded in mystery. The fact that he was still alive and seemingly well wasn't just unsettling. It was a sign that there were parts of the web that had been left untouched. "I know you have questions, Camille," Voss began, his voice low and calculated. "But you and I both know that the Circle's fall wasn't the end. It's just the beginning of something else. Something far more dangerous." Camille's stomach twisted. "What are you talking about? There are still factions. You've exposed the largest of them." "Yes, but you missed the ones that were truly dangerous. There are underground movements, emerging powers, people who were always meant to stay hidden. The Shadow Circle was never a single entity. It was just a front for something much older." Camille's mind raced. "What are you asking of me, Voss?" "I'm not asking anything," he replied with a faint, almost amused laugh. "I'm offering you a partnership. We both know you can't fight this on your own. The Shadow Circle's legacy has a long reach, and it's time you accepted the truth. If you want to build a future free from their influence, you'll need allies. Allies like me." Camille's heart thudded painfully. Voss was offering a strange, dangerous alliance. It was hard to resist the pull of such an offer after all. He had been a part of the Circle. He knew their secrets. But could she trust him? "I don't trust you," Camille said bluntly. "You don't have to," Voss replied with cold finality. "But you need me." The silence stretched between them as Camille weighed the consequences of working with someone like Voss. On one hand, he could give her access to deeper networks, expose the hidden remnants of the Shadow Circle. On the other hand, she had spent so long fighting against the manipulation, the secrecy, the control. "Give me time to think," Camille finally said, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "I'll be waiting," Voss said before the line went dead. Part 3. The Crossroads. Camille spent days weighing her options, grappling with the offer Voss had extended. There was no denying that the world was more complex than she had imagined. The power struggles, the undercurrents of influence, were not something she could dismantle overnight. Clara, ever the realist, knew Camille was facing a dangerous crossroads. "You know as well as I do that alliances like this come with strings attached," she warned, pouring Camille another cup of tea. "But if anyone can keep their footing in a world like that, it's you." "I don't know if I want to keep my footing in that world, Clara," Camille replied, staring out the window at the city below. "But Voss is right about one thing We can't fix everything on our own. If I want to make sure the shadow circle stays gone, I have to understand what's really lurking in the dark. And that means taking risks. Clara sighed, leaning back in her chair. I can't tell you what to do, Camille. But I know one thing: you fought too hard to just fall back into their hands. This time, you need to make sure you're in control. Camille thought for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her chest. The shadow circle might be in ruins, but their influence, like the roots of a dead tree, hadn't fully withered. And she had learned enough in the past year to understand that real power never truly disappeared. It adapted, and it hid. I'll meet with him, Camille said finally. But on my terms, I'll never let him control me. Not again. Part 4. The Final Choice. The meeting with Gordon Voss took place in a small, secluded office in an old building, far from the prying eyes of the city. The room was dimly lit, the shadows long and oppressive. Voss sat at a large desk, waiting for Camille with a calculating smile, as though he already knew what she would decide. You came alone, he said, his tone almost impressed. I'll admit, I wasn't sure you'd have the nerve. I don't make deals with people like you lightly, Camille replied, her voice firm. But I need to know everything you know about what's left of the shadow circle. Voss leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. Everything you want to know, Camille, is right at your fingertips. The question is, how far are you willing to go to find it? Camille's eyes narrowed, but she held his gaze. I don't want your power. I don't need to become like you. I just want the truth. I want to make sure no one else gets pulled into this mess. You want to make the world a better place, Voss said with a quiet chuckle. How quaint. But the truth, Camille, is that the world doesn't work like that. There will always be people like me, people who understand how to pull the strings. And you're playing a game that you don't fully understand. I understand enough, Camille shot back. I don't need to become what you are. I just need to finish what I started. You can help me with that. Voss stood and walked over to the window, looking out over the city as though contemplating the future. After a long pause, he turned to face her again, his expression unreadable. All right, Camille, let's see if we can make this world of ours a little more interesting, he said, as though accepting the unspoken terms of their partnership. Camille's heart pounded. She knew that she had just crossed another line, but this time, she was determined to make sure she was the one holding the reins. Chapter 12. Into the Abyss, Part 1. The Web Tightens. The weeks following her decision to work with Gordon Voss were a whirlwind of calculated moves and subtle shifts. Camille had made it clear from the beginning that she would be in control. But the more she dug into the remnants of the shadow circle, the more she realized just how deep the rot had gone. Voss, for all his cold demeanor, was right about one thing. There were still factions powerful, hidden forces operating in the shadows. As Camille's network of allies grew, so did her understanding of the web of corruption that stretched beyond her initial grasp. The Shadow Circle's leaders hadn't simply been wealthy elites. They had been involved in every corner of global influence politics, business, and even the media. Each piece she uncovered led to another, and each answer she received only raised more questions. Voss's information had been invaluable, but she knew that trusting him completely would be a mistake. His interests were still tied to a dark past, and though he had helped her dismantle a part of the circle, there was always the possibility that his own ambitions ran deeper than he let on. The question was no longer just about taking down the remnants of the shadow circle. It was about navigating the fragile balance between using Voss's knowledge to her advantage and not falling into his grasp as a pawn in his game. Camille knew that if she was to succeed in this new world of power, she would need to do more than expose the circle's secrets. She would need to build a network of influence, one that didn't rely on manipulation, but on the strength of transparency and truth. Part 2. The Edge of Control. One evening, after a long day of strategizing with her team, Camille stood alone on the rooftop of the building where the Resistance had set up their headquarters. The skyline before her was familiar, yet distant, a reminder of the life she had once known, before the shadow circle had exposed the rot beneath its gilded surface. Her thoughts drifted to Ethan. He had been silent for weeks now, and Camille wondered if he had retreated into his world of power or if he had disappeared entirely. She didn't want to think about him not anymore, but there was a part of her that couldn't help but wonder what happened to the man she had once loved. Was he out there, still loyal to the circle? Or had he realized, too late, that everything he had been part of was crumbling? As her mind wandered, Camille's phone buzzed, snapping her from her reverie. It was a message from Clara. "Clara, we found something. Meet me in an hour." The cryptic message sent a jolt through Camille. Clara was meticulous, and if she was calling for an urgent meeting, it meant they had uncovered something important. Without wasting another moment, Camille grabbed her coat and headed out, her heart racing with anticipation. Part 3. A Bitter Reunion. The rendezvous took place in a secluded part of the city, at an old warehouse on the edge of the docks. Camille arrived to find Clara already waiting, her expression grim as she watched the waves crash against the shore. "What's going on?" Camille asked, her voice laced with concern. Clara didn't answer right away. Instead, she handed Camille a folder thick with documents, photographs, and maps. "You need to see this," she said quietly. Camille flipped through the papers quickly, her eyes scanning the files. They contained intelligence reports about the Shadow Circle's surviving factions. But what caught her attention was the mention of a final, secret meeting, a gathering of the most powerful members of the Circle. It was scheduled to take place soon, and it was supposed to be the final phase of their operations, a plan that would bring them back into power, once and for all. "They're not done," Camille murmured, her voice filled with disbelief. "How can they still have the resources to pull this off?" Clara's eyes met hers, filled with a hard, determined edge. "They've been playing the long game. They've been consolidating their power, even after everything that happened. And now, they're moving faster than we thought. This meeting, it's where everything will come to a head." Camille's heart pounded as she realized what this meant. The remaining leaders of the Shadow Circle weren't just trying to rebuild. They were planning something catastrophic. If they succeeded in this final phase, it could mean the collapse of everything they had fought for, everything Camille had worked toward. "I need to stop this," Camille said, her voice filled with urgency. "Where is the meeting taking place?" Clara paused before responding, her face darkening. At Kilmorden Castle. The name hit Camille like a punch to the gut. Kilmorden Castle, where everything had started. The place that had once symbolized the darkness of the shadow circle. She had thought it was over, but now it seemed that the final battle would take place in the very heart of the circle's power. Then we go to Kilmorden, Camille said, her voice steady with resolve. We end this tonight. Part 4. The Gathering of Shadows. The drive to Kilmorden Castle was filled with tension. The sky above was dark, with the last remnants of daylight fading quickly. As Camille approached the gates of the castle, her pulse quickened. This place had haunted her for so long, and now it was where everything would either end or begin anew. Clara sat beside her, her eyes focused on the road. We don't know how many of them will be there. Clara warned, it's risky. They've been waiting for this moment. Just as much as you have. I'm not afraid, Camille replied, her voice cold. If they think they can stop me, they're wrong. I've already taken down the face of the circle. Now, it's time to expose the rest of them. The castle loomed ahead, its Gothic silhouette barely visible against the night sky. As they passed through the iron gates, Camille felt a cold shiver run down her spine. This was the place that had witnessed so many lives controlled and ruined by the shadow circle. But now, it would be the place where everything ended, inside the castle. The rooms were dark and silent, save for the faint hum of security systems and the distant echoes of footsteps. Camille's team moved through the halls with precision, each person on high alert. The meeting was close, and they had no time to waste. As they neared the central chamber, the door creaked open, revealing a small group of figures gathered around a table. At the head of the table sat a familiar face, Victor Leclerc. He looked up, his cold eyes locking with Camille's. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his gaze, something like a challenge. You're too late, Camille, he said, his voice calm, almost pitying. This isn't your fight anymore. Camille's heart raced, but she didn't falter. It never was your fight. Victor, she replied, her tone sharp. It was always about power, and now you've lost. Victor chuckled darkly. You think you've won. You've only scratched the surface of what's to come. The circle never dies. Camille, it only adapts. Not this time, Camille said firmly. Stepping forward, this is the end of the road for you, and I'm here to make sure it stays that way. As the final confrontation began, Camille realized that this wasn't just about defeating Victor or the remnants of the shadow circle. It was about breaking the cycle, about ensuring that no one would ever again be trapped in their web of deceit and manipulation. The battle for the future was unfolding in Kilmorden Castle, and Camille Armitage was ready to take the final step into the light. Chapter 13. The Heart of Darkness. Part 1. The Final Confrontation. The atmosphere inside Kilmorden Castle felt suffocating. The stone walls, once symbols of power, now felt like tombs, holding the remnants of a dark history that had endured far too long. The soft echo of Camille's footsteps reverberated through the cold hallways as she moved with determination. The members of her team were close behind, ready for the fight that awaited them. Victor Leclerc, the embodiment of the circle's lingering influence, stood at the head of a long, dark oak table, flanked by a group of figures whose faces were hidden behind masks. The room smelled of dust and age, as if the walls had been waiting for this moment as much as Camille had. "I knew you'd come." "Camille," Victor said, his voice smooth and controlled, betraying none of the tension that simmered beneath. "But you must understand, you've already lost. The circle is eternal. Its members change, but the power it wields never fades." Camille's heart pounded in her chest, but her voice remained unwavering. "Your power ends here, Victor. I won't let you drag the world back into the shadows." Victor's lips curled into a thin smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You think that you can end all of this. You think you can change a world that's built on deception. You'll never win." Camille took another step forward, her eyes locking with his. "It's not just about me, Victor. It's about everyone who's suffered under your control. It's about making sure you and people like you never get the chance to rule again." Behind her, Clara and the others had set up surveillance equipment, securing the perimeter of the room. The plan was simple: expose the remaining leaders of the Shadow Circle, broadcast their crimes, and bring the world's attention to the truth. Camille had long realized that she couldn't simply fight power with power. The only way to take down the Shadow Circle completely was to strip them of their secrecy, to force the world to see who they really were. Victor's hand subtly moved to a concealed compartment in the table, and Camille recognized the movement immediately. She had no time to hesitate. "Move!" she shouted. In that instant, chaos erupted. Her team leapt into action, securing the exits and disabling the surveillance systems. Camille rushed toward the table, her heart thumping as she realized what was at stake. Victor was no longer just a man standing in her way. He was the embodiment of everything she had fought against, and now it was time to end it. Part 2. A Dangerous Game. Victor's eyes flared with fury as he quickly drew a hidden weapon from beneath the table, a sleek, black gun. He aimed it at Camille, his finger on the trigger. Time seemed to slow as Camille dove for cover behind a large stone pillar. The sound of gunfire echoed in the room, followed by the unmistakable clatter of shattering glass as the weapon misfired. "Do you really think you can stop me?" Victor taunted, moving swiftly to the other side of the room. He seemed to know every inch of the castle, every shadow, every corner that could give him an advantage. Camille's mind raced as she ducked low, her hand reaching for the pistol concealed in her jacket. She had trained for moments like this, planned for the worst. She could hear Clara and the others moving in position, setting up to counter any of Victor's moves, but Camille couldn't afford to rely on anyone else. This was her fight. She sprang from her hiding spot, rushing toward Victor. Her movements were calculated and swift, but he was ready for her. A burst of gunfire rang out again, this time grazing her arm. Camille winced in pain but pushed through, adrenaline surging through her veins. "You don't get to walk away from this, Camille," Victor spat, his eyes wild with rage. "You're nothing but a fleeting distraction." Camille's vision blurred with pain, but her resolve was clear. "I'm not the distraction. You are." With that, she fired a quick shot, hitting Victor in the shoulder. He staggered backward, his grip on the weapon faltering, but instead of collapsing, he lunged at her, his body moving with the desperation of a cornered animal. Clara's voice, rang out from behind Camille. He's not alone. Watch out. In the chaos of the struggle, Camille realized that the others in the room were not simply bystanders. Victor had back up more members of the Shadow Circle. The remaining leaders were here, watching the fight unfold. She could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of everything she had sacrificed, and the lives that depended on her success. Part 3. Breaking the Circle. It was now or never. Camille had come this far, and she wasn't going to let Victor or anyone else stand in her way. With a burst of energy, she pushed Victor off of her, sending him crashing into a set of old bookshelves. Books tumbled to the floor, but Camille didn't pause. She moved quickly to the central control panel, where Clara had already begun working to broadcast the footage they had recorded of the confrontation. Victor scrambled to his feet, his face twisted in rage. "You won't get away with this. Camille, the circle will never fall. There will always be more like me." Camille turned to face him, the gun still in her hand. Though she no longer needed it, she had already won. She had exposed him. And now everyone his supporters. The world would see him for what he truly was. The Shadow Circle's power lay in secrecy, and Camille had shattered that forever. "You're wrong," Camille said firmly. "The world is done with people like you." With a final, defiant look, Victor made his way toward a side exit, his body language still full of the arrogance that had once defined him. But as he reached the door, Camille fired one last shot into the air, a loud warning that echoed throughout the castle. Victor stopped, turned, and stared at her for a moment before disappearing into the shadows, knowing that his time was over. The circle's reign had ended, and with it, the darkness that had clouded her life for so long. Part 4. The end of the line. The broadcast had been successful. News outlets across the world carried the story of the final confrontation in Kilmorden Castle. The last members of the Shadow Circle were exposed, their crimes laid bare for all to see. The wealth, the corruption, the control they could no longer hide. As Camille watched the news reports unfold, she felt the weight of the moment sink in. The world would never be the same. The battle had been long and hard, but they had succeeded. The transparency she had fought for had become a reality. But Camille knew that the fight for a just world was far from over. There would always be those who tried to control the truth, those who sought to return to the darkness, and Camille, having faced the heart of that darkness, would continue to stand against it. She would lead, guide, and fight to ensure that the world she had helped create would stay in the light. For the first time in years, Camille felt a sense of peace. The long road to healing for herself and the world had only just begun. And as she looked out over the city, she knew that she was ready to face whatever came next. The Shadow Circle was no more. But Camille Armitage's fight for justice was just beginning. Epilogue. The legacy of truth. In the months that followed, Camille's work became a symbol of hope. She continued to serve as a leader in the global fight against corruption, using her platform to encourage the transparency and openness she had fought so hard for. The resistance had grown into a powerful movement, and Camille's efforts had ignited change on a scale few had anticipated. She traveled the world, speaking to communities, leading reform initiatives, and working to dismantle the remnants of the influence that had once ruled the corridors of power. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer invisible. And through it all, Camille found herself at peace with the choices she had made. She had lost much along the way, but in the end, she had gained something far more important: her freedom, her truth, and her purpose. As the sun rose over a new world, Camille Armitage stood tall, knowing that her journey had changed the course of history. And though the future remained uncertain, she was no longer afraid. The end of the Shadow Circle was just the beginning. Chapter 14. The Ripple Effect Part 1. A world in flux months had passed since the final battle at Kilmorden Castle, and the world Camille had fought to rebuild was slowly starting to take shape. The Shadow Circle was no longer a shadow lurking behind powerful figures. It was exposed. Its corruption laid bare. The political landscape had shifted, and with each passing day, new reforms took root in the systems that had long been broken. It wasn't perfect, but the wheels of change were in motion. Yet even as Camille worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going, there were moments of stillness, where the weight of her journey settled deep within her. The endless nights spent planning, the near-death encounters, the relationships she had sacrificed, everything had led her here. And now, the world was watching. Camille was no longer just an activist or former socialite. She was a symbol, a woman who had taken down a global network of power and corruption. Her name was known in every corner of the world, and as much as she had once feared the spotlight, she couldn't deny the responsibility it brought. But the deeper she delved into the aftermath, the more she realized the truth power was never truly gone. It simply morphed. It adapted. And those who once hid in the shadows were now maneuvering to reclaim their grip on the world. Even the destruction of the Shadow Circle didn't eradicate the networks of influence they had left behind. Now, the question was, how far would Camille be willing to go to ensure the systems they had fought so hard to dismantle didn't rise again? Part 2. The Return of the Past. One evening, as Camille sat in her office at the Resistance headquarters, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it felt urgent. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Camille Armitage," she said, her voice calm but steady. The voice on the other end was low, familiar, and laced with something dangerous. "Camille, it's Ethan." For a moment, Camille was frozen, her heart racing. She hadn't heard from Ethan in months. After the final confrontation at Kilmorden Castle, they had both gone their separate ways, she, rebuilding her life, and he, fading into the shadows of his own guilt and betrayal. But hearing his voice again, so unexpectedly, brought everything rushing back. Ethan Camille finally managed, her voice sharp but controlled. "Why are you calling me?" "I need your help," he said, his tone tense. "The circle is not done. I know you've exposed the core of it, but there are factions, hidden forces that are still alive. And now they're targeting you." "Camille." Her mind raced as she processed his words. "What do you mean, the circle is finished? We ended it. We exposed it." Ethan's voice trembled, but there was a sharp edge to it. "It's not that simple. The circle was just a front. There's a deeper power behind it, one that we never fully understood. They want to control everything. You're in danger. And if you don't listen to me, it'll all start again. Camille's stomach churned. Was Ethan telling the truth? Or was this another attempt to manipulate her, to draw her back into his world? She couldn't afford to make the same mistake twice. You had your chance, Ethan, Camille said firmly, her voice cutting through the silence. You had your chance to be honest with me. You chose the circle over everything, over me. I'm done with your lies. There was a long pause on the other end. When Ethan spoke again, his voice was soft but desperate. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Camille. I'm asking for your help. This isn't over. The people who remain, they're planning something bigger than anything you can imagine. Camille closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had walked away from Ethan, from the betrayal. But his words carried an undeniable truth. The circle may have fallen, but its legacy, the connections, the power structures, the unseen hands were still at play. Meet me, Ethan said, his voice urgent. We have to discuss this. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to stop them. Camille hesitated, torn between her anger and the growing realization that she might have no choice. The world they had fought to change wasn't finished, and this new threat could be the catalyst that would bring everything back into the darkness. She had no choice but to face it head on, where she asked, her voice cold. Same place as before, Ethan replied, Kilmorden Castle. The line went dead, and Camille sat in silence, staring at the phone. The past was calling her back, pulling her toward the place where it all began. But this time, she wouldn't be the same woman who had walked into that castle with hope and trust. She would walk in as the force that had broken the shadow circle. And this time, she wouldn't let anyone, least of all Ethan, control her. Part 3. The Return to Kilmorden. The drive to Kilmorden Castle felt like a return to a place Camille had tried to bury deep within her. The castle, its walls standing tall against the dark sky, looked as imposing as it had when she first arrived, a monument to the power and corruption she had spent so long fighting against. But now, as Camille stood at the entrance, her heart heavy with the weight of the past, she wasn't sure what to expect. Ethan's warning echoed in her mind. The circle is not done. Inside the castle, the air felt different. The corridors were silent, but the walls seemed to watch her as she walked through them. She could still remember the time she had spent here, when everything felt like it was falling apart. But now, with her purpose clear and her resolve hardened, Camille was no longer afraid. Ethan was waiting for her in the same room where they had met before, the place that had become a symbol of everything they had lost. He didn't look like the man she remembered. There was a weariness to him now, something broken in his eyes that hadn't been there before. I didn't expect you to come, he said, his voice quiet. But I'm glad you did. Camille didn't respond immediately. She crossed the room, standing just a few feet from him. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the pain, the anger still lingered, but she pushed it aside. The future was what mattered now. Tell me everything, Camille said. What's left of the shadow circle, and what exactly are they planning? Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. It's not the circle itself that's dangerous anymore, he said. It's the people who were controlling it from the shadows, the ones who stayed hidden, even from us. And now, they're ready to act. Camille listened closely as Ethan laid out the details of the new threat, a network of power players, many of whom had been part of the original circle, still pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The world they had been fighting to free from manipulation wasn't just dealing with the remnants of the old order. There were new players, people even more dangerous, and they were working in the shadows, preparing to reclaim their power. The circle's true power lies in the unseen, Ethan explained. It's not just about money or politics. It's about control over the systems, over the media, the economy, the public consciousness. And these people, Camille, they're about to make their move. Camille took a step back, her mind racing. She had fought so hard to expose the truth, to tear down the facade. But the real battle, she now realized, was far from over. She turned toward the window, staring out into the night. The city below seemed calm, unaware of the new storm brewing on the horizon. The real challenge had just begun. We finish what we started, Camille said quietly. We expose them all. Ethan nodded, his face grim. Are you sure about this? Camille didn't hesitate. There's no turning back. As the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Camille knew one thing. This fight wasn't just about taking down a corrupt system. It was about redefining the very world in which they lived. The circle was far from finished, but Camille was ready. This time, the darkness would not win, and together with Ethan, for better or worse, they would ensure that the truth would finally emerge. Chapter 15, The Dark Reawakening Part 1, The Hidden Masters. Camille couldn't shake the sense of inevitability as she sat in the room at Kilmorden Castle. Facing Ethan, the walls, once full of secrets, now felt oppressive as the truth began to unfold around her. Despite everything she had exposed, despite the collapse of the shadow circle, she realized that the true battle had just begun. Ethan's warning echoed in her mind. The circle is not done. As much as she had hoped for closure, as much as she had longed to be free from the tangled web of power and manipulation, Camille now understood that she hadn't truly won. She had taken down the figureheads, the visible players, but the real power, the force behind the scenes, had always remained hidden. Who are they? Ethan Camille asked, her voice steady, but her heart racing. The ones still pulling the strings. Ethan looked at her, his face weary. They're not a group like the Circle. They're individuals, players with their own agendas. They've learned to stay in the shadows, behind the scenes, pulling the strings of the global economy, media, and politics. And now, they're moving. Camille stared at him, feeling a surge of anger and frustration. You knew about them, and you let them control everything. Ethan's expression was full of regret. I didn't know how deep it went. Camille, not until it was too late. The shadow circle was just a mask. They created the illusion of power so no one would see the real architects behind it. And now they want to finish what they started, Camille said bitterly, by using the remnants of the circle to regain control. Ethan nodded, his voice low. They've been waiting for this moment. They've been building for years, carefully avoiding detection. And now, They believe the world is weak, vulnerable. They'll exploit the chaos left behind. Camille clenched her fists, her mind spinning. How many more had they hurt? How many more would they sacrifice for their ambition? You know what this means. Don't you? Camille said, her voice calm but intense. We don't just need to expose them. We need to take them down, completely. The circle was just the surface. These people are the real enemy, and I won't stop until I've destroyed every last one of them. Ethan didn't argue. He didn't even look surprised. It was as if he, too, had known that this fight would never be over. Then we need to find them before they act, he said, determination creeping into his voice. The longer we wait, the stronger they'll become. Camille nodded. We start now. Part 2. The first move. Clara was already at the headquarters, coordinating their next steps. When Camille and Ethan arrived, she was in the midst of reviewing a pile of intelligence reports. The team had been working tirelessly to track down the members of this new, secretive faction, but the information was scarce. The leaders of this shadow network were ghosts untouchable, hidden in plain sight. Anything Camille asked as she joined Clara at the table. Clara's expression was grim. They're good. We've traced some money, a few shell companies, but the people behind them are ghosts. They've covered their tracks well. But there's one thing we do know. What's that? Camille asked. There's a meeting, a summit of sorts, a gathering of the people we've been tracking. It's happening in 2 weeks. We're not sure where yet, but we've got a lead. If we can get there, we'll have our chance to expose them. Camille's eyes narrowed. Then we go. We don't wait. We can't afford to. If they're planning something, we have to be there. Ethan, standing silently by the window, spoke up. The meeting is likely to be heavily protected. They won't just let anyone in. We don't need to just walk in, Camille replied, a dark determination in her voice. We'll find a way in. We'll infiltrate. The time for playing by their rules is over. Clara nodded. I'll have the team gather intel, get the best possible locations. We need to be ready for anything. The last thing we want is to walk into a trap. Camille's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't show it. This wasn't just about stopping another organization. This was personal. The shadows had haunted her long enough. It was time to end it. Let's get to work, Camille said. Part 3. The Gathering of Secrets. The following days were a blur of preparations. Camille and Clara worked around the clock, reviewing satellite images, hacking into communications networks, and analyzing patterns that could lead them to the secret meeting. They made use of every resource they had, every ally they had built over the years. The world, now more interconnected than ever, was their weapon. As the summit drew nearer, Camille found herself torn between her fear of what they were about to face and the drive to expose these hidden figures for good. She couldn't afford to hesitate now. When the day arrived, Camille and her team moved like shadows, infiltrating the gathering's location in the heart of a sprawling, ultra-modern city. The place was a fortress, secured with private guards and state-of-the-art technology. But Camille had always thrived in the spaces where others thought they were safe. She would not let herself be caught in the traps they had set. The team split into 2 groups, one for surveillance and the other for penetration. Camille's role was simple: get inside, gather whatever intel she could, and make sure the meeting was exposed for the world to see. No more secrets, No more power players behind closed doors. Clara's voice came over the comms. We're in! Moving to position! Camille took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of the moment settle in her chest. This was the culmination of everything the truth had been hidden long enough. Tonight, it would finally be revealed. Part 4. The Meeting of Shadows. Camille entered the grand hall, its walls lined with glass, giving the illusion of openness. But as she looked around, she saw the truth. The walls weren't for transparency, they were for surveillance. Hidden cameras tracked every movement, and the people gathered here weren't there to discuss ideas. They were there to keep control. She could feel the presence of power in the room, heavy and suffocating. Some faces were familiar figures she had seen in the media, others from the political and financial realms. But the majority were strangers, their identities masked behind faceless personas, making the room feel like a gathering of ghosts. The leader of the group, a tall figure in a black suit, stepped forward and raised a hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice like velvet. "Tonight, we convene to discuss the future of our network. The old ways have failed, and now is the time for a new order." Camille's heart raced. She knew these words. They weren't just discussing power, they were preparing to re-establish a global dominance that had been fractured. The old ways, the ones she and her allies had shattered, were about to be resurrected, and the world would be none the wiser. She needed to move quickly. The information Camille had gathered over the past days was invaluable. It was time to expose them for the world to see. She activated the broadcast signal from her hidden device, sending the meeting's proceedings live across the globe. Within seconds, the footage was streaming on every major network, revealing the faces of the shadowy figures who had been pulling the strings for so long. Part 5. The Endgame. As the footage spread across the globe, the figures at the summit reacted with chaos. Security alarms blared, and the guards scrambled to contain the situation. But it was too late. The world was watching. Camille stood in the center of the chaos, her breath steady, knowing that this was the final battle. The Shadow Circle's true power wasn't in the wealth or the influence, it was in their ability to remain invisible. But now, they were exposed, and their grip on the world had been shattered. She turned to Ethan, who had been standing in the shadows, watching everything unfold. "This is the end," Camille said, her voice quiet but resolute. "For you, for them, for everything." Ethan didn't reply. His face was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes: regret, perhaps, or maybe acceptance, as the resistance moved in to secure the building, arresting those who had been part of the meeting. Camille felt a strange sense of closure. This chapter was ending, but the work wasn't over. The world had been forced to face the truth, and with that truth, there would be change. Epilogue. A future reborn. Months later, Camille stood once again at the helm of the movement for justice, watching as the world continued to rebuild. The remnants of the Shadow Circle had been dismantled, but Camille knew that the fight for transparency and freedom was an ongoing one. There would always be those who sought to control the narrative, to manipulate the truth. But now, Camille had learned one thing for certain: when the shadows fall, the light always shines brighter. She would keep fighting, not because she had to, but because she believed in the future they were building, one where truth and justice would always prevail. And this time, the darkness would never return. Chapter 16, Rebuilding the Foundations, Part 1. The Ripple Effect of Exposure. The aftermath of the final takedown of the Shadow Circle had left the world in a state of shock. Global media outlets were still covering the story. The revelations about the powerful figures and hidden networks shaking the foundations of political, financial, and social systems everywhere. The once unassailable elites now found themselves under scrutiny, with investigations opening across the world, their empires of corruption crumbling one brick at a time. But as much as Camille had fought for this moment, as much as she had sought to bring the truth to light, the weight of the change still pressed on her shoulders. The resistance had done its job, exposing the Shadow Circle and its true leaders. But now, Camille knew, was the hardest part rebuilding. The power vacuum left by the Shadow Circle's collapse was filling with new faces, but not all of them were benevolent. In the absence of the old network, other groups, some familiar, some new, were quickly trying to fill the gaps. The world was shifting, and Camille's role was now to guide that shift, ensuring that what they had fought for didn't become just another fleeting moment in history. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as Camille poured herself into her work. New alliances were formed. Political leaders, journalists, activists, and even former insiders from the circle now worked together under the banner of transparency and truth. Laws were being passed, systems were being restructured, and for the first time in years, people were beginning to trust in the power of collective action. But with this newfound hope came its own dangers. Old power structures were never truly gone, they just morphed into something else. And Camille, now more than ever, had to remain vigilant. The battle for truth was ongoing, and she had to ensure the foundation they were building wasn't susceptible to the same forces that had corrupted the past. Part 2. Echoes from the Past. One evening, Camille received a visitor, a man she had hoped to never see again. Ethan. It had been months since their final confrontation at Kilmorden Castle, and although she had heard nothing from him since, his presence now filled the air with an uneasy tension. She didn't know what had brought him back, but part of her had always known that the story between them wasn't finished. Camille sat in her office, staring at the city below. When Ethan walked in, his expression was worn, his once pristine appearance now faded with the weight of time and regret. The man who had once stood at the head of a powerful empire now seemed like a ghost, haunted by the consequences of his own choices. "You wanted to talk," Camille said, her voice sharp yet calm, betraying none of the emotions swirling beneath the surface. Ethan hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I didn't come here for reconciliation. Camille, I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to understand that everything I did, it wasn't for power. Not in the way you think." And Camille's eyes narrowed. "Then why, Ethan? Why did you betray everything we had? Why did you keep me in the dark for so long?" "I was blinded," he said quietly. "By ambition, by loyalty to something that promised security and control. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I was just protecting myself. I was part of the problem." Camille clenched her fists, her heart hardening. "You were part of the problem, Ethan?" And you've only just realized that now. Ethan nodded slowly. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything. But I'm here because I need to make things right. The world's changed, Camille, and I don't want to be part of it if I can't be honest with myself. Camille remained silent, her gaze fixed on him. His words weren't enough to undo the past, but there was something raw in his eyes, a sincerity that felt, for the first time, untainted by manipulation. She could see the struggle within him, the internal war he had fought since the fall of the Shadow Circle. I've worked with you, Ethan, she said finally, her voice steady but distant. But there's a difference now. You're not in control anymore, and neither am I. We're part of something bigger than ourselves now. Ethan's gaze softened. I know, and I'm ready to help, if you'll let me. I know you've built something new, something better, and I want to be a part of that. Camille met his gaze, her heart torn between the man he once was and the person standing before her. The person who had once betrayed her trust, yet now stood in front of her with the weight of his choices hanging over him. Help, she repeated. You think after everything, you can just walk back into this world after everything you've done. Ethan didn't flinch. I don't expect to be welcomed. Camille, but I'm asking for a chance to make amends. And I want to help you, to help build a future where people like us, people who made mistakes, can help make things right. There was a long pause as Camille considered his words. It wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about what he could offer, what he had learned from the ashes of the Shadow Circle. Could she trust him again? Could she bring him back into the fold? Knowing the risks, I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice calm but distant. Ethan nodded, his eyes filled with quiet relief. Thank you. That's all I ask. He turned to leave, and as the door closed behind him, Camille let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She wasn't sure if she could trust him again, but one thing was certain. Ethan's return had marked a turning point. The past was never truly gone. And the future, she now realized, would be shaped not just by the people she chose to stand by her side, but by the very choices she made moving forward. Part 3. A Path Forward. The months passed, and the world Camille had fought for began to solidify. The old systems of power that had once governed society were slowly being replaced with more transparent, accountable structures. Public trust, once shattered, was slowly being rebuilt as people rallied together for the common good. But the work was far from over. As Camille worked tirelessly alongside her allies to build this new world, she found herself still haunted by the ghosts of the past. Ethan, though now trying to make amends, was a reminder of the complexity of their world. He was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong, yet in his efforts to change, he also became a symbol of hope for redemption. But Camille knew that redemption was a slow and difficult road, and as much as she had grown in her own strength, she couldn't do it alone. The fight for a just world would require constant vigilance, and with it, sacrifices. There would always be new challenges, new threats trying to reclaim power. But Camille wasn't afraid. She had faced the darkest parts of the system, and she had won. She would not stop until the systems of manipulation and corruption were eradicated completely. One morning, as Camille stood overlooking the city from her office, she felt a surge of determination. The world was still fragile, but it was hers to protect. She would keep fighting, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been manipulated by the darkness she had once been trapped in. The road ahead was long, but Camille Armitage was ready. Epilogue: A New Beginning. The battle against the Shadow Circle was only the beginning. With the structures of power still shifting, Camille and her allies had a long road ahead, but together, they would ensure that the world would never again be ruled by shadows. The fight for truth, transparency, and justice continued, and Camille stood at the front, leading the charge, a beacon of hope for a better future. And as the sun rose over the city, Camille knew that, no matter the obstacles, she would continue to lead the way toward the light. Chapter 17. The Jacinthe Water Part 1. The Quiet Resistance. Camille stood at the window of her new office, watching the city stretch out before her. The skyline, once a symbol of corruption and hidden power, now seemed like a promise of the future, a future she had fought for and helped create. The world was shifting, the balance of power slowly tilting back toward the people. But even as she celebrated the small victories, Camille knew that the battle was never truly over. The Shadow Circle was gone, but their influence was still very much alive. The remnants of the old power structure had splintered, but new players had already begun to fill the gaps. As Camille's team worked to expose corruption in various sectors, she realized that every time one faction was taken down, another would rise to take its place. The systems were more resilient than she had expected. Her phone buzzed, breaking her from her thoughts. It was a message from Clara. "Clara, we need to talk. Meet me in an hour." Clara's urgency had become something Camille didn't ignore. Clara had always been the one to see the bigger picture, to recognize patterns that others couldn't. If she was calling for a meeting, it meant that something serious was on the horizon. Part 2. New Faces. Old Foes. When Camille arrived at the headquarters, Clara was waiting for her in the strategy room. The room, once a hub of chaos and hasty decisions, now felt oddly calm, perhaps too calm. Clara's expression was grim as she motioned for Camille to take a seat. "We've got a problem," Clara began, sliding a set of papers across the table. "The Shadow Circle may be broken, but the remnants have spread out. There's a new network forming smaller factions, each one more elusive than the last." Camille's heart sank. "I thought we dismantled the system, cut off the heads." "We did," Clara confirmed. "But the power of the circle wasn't in just a few people. It was in the system they had built, the connections, the influence, the ones that survived. They're not coming back as leaders, but they've learned. And now they're operating in the shadows, still pulling strings." Camille flipped through the documents, her eyes scanning the names and files. Several new names appeared, leaders of powerful business conglomerates, even a few political figures. But there was one name that stood out: Marcellus Vallon, a financier with connections to some of the world's largest banks and tech companies. Clara continued. "Vallon's been moving behind the scenes for years. He has the resources, the power, and the connections. But what makes him dangerous is his ability to remain unseen. He's learned from the Shadow Circle's mistakes. He doesn't leave a trace. And now he's starting to build something new, a more covert network of influence. Do we have anything concrete on him? Camille asked, trying to steady her racing thoughts. Not much, Clara said. That's the problem. He's been covering his tracks well, but we've managed to trace some financial movements illegal, shady deals, the kind of thing the Circle used to do. It's just the beginning, but we're getting closer. Camille leaned back, her mind working through the possibilities. Valen, like Victor, was a master of the game, someone who could blend into the background and still control events from the shadows. He was playing a long game, building alliances, consolidating power in ways that would be hard to trace until it was too late. How do we go after him? Camille asked. Clara paused, her fingers drumming on the table. We need to find out where he's hiding. We need to break through the layers of protection he's set up. If we can get to him, we can expose the network he's building. Part 3. Moving in the dark. Camille's days became a blur of strategy sessions, late-night meetings, and covert operations. The fight for transparency had always been difficult, but now, with new enemies lurking in the shadows, it felt like an even more impossible task. The new network, although small, was growing, and Valen was proving to be just as elusive as Clara had warned. As the weeks passed, Camille's team had uncovered a pattern, a series of small, untraceable transactions linked to a private bank in Geneva. There was no direct evidence tying Valen to it, but Camille knew that the true power of these networks wasn't in the money, it was in the manipulation of global markets, the quiet control of corporations, and the ability to shape economies without anyone noticing. Camille stood in front of a large map in the strategy room, tracing lines with her finger as she spoke. We know that Valen has access to some of the world's largest financial systems. But where does his influence go from here? What's his next move? Clara studied the map, her eyes narrowing. I think he's trying to consolidate control in the tech sector more than just money. It's about control over information, surveillance, and data. That's the real currency now. Then we need to go after the data, Camille said, her voice steely. If we expose what he's doing with the data, we'll break the network. Clara nodded, but that won't be easy. We'll have to get into his systems, hack into his infrastructure. If he's as smart as we think he is, he's locked everything down tight. We'll find a way, Camille said, determination in her voice. We have to. Part 4. The Truth in the Shadows. The next few days were a race against time. Camille and Clara worked with their network of hackers, financial experts, and former insiders from the Shadow Circle to break through Valen's defenses. It was a dangerous game, one where any misstep could lead to disaster. But Camille had learned to operate in the darkness, to fight with her mind and her network, rather than relying on brute force. Finally, after days of work, they found the breakthrough they had been waiting for. A series of encrypted files linked directly to Valen's private bank account files that contained key information about his operations, his alliances, and his true objectives. The documents confirmed what Camille had suspected. Valen wasn't just a financier. He was attempting to set up an entirely new system of control, one that operated outside the reach of traditional power structures. This is it, Clara said, her eyes scanning the data. He's building an infrastructure that could rival the power the Shadow Circle once had. If he succeeds, he'll control everything: governments, businesses, media. He'll reshape the entire world. Camille clenched her fists. We can't let that happen. We need to expose this before it's too late. Part 5. The Final Blow. With the evidence in hand, Camille and her team launched their final strike. They released the files to the public: every document, every transaction, every connection that Valen had tried to hide. The world watched as the scope of his operation was revealed in real time, and the backlash was immediate. Governments, tech companies, and the public were outraged. Valen's name was plastered across every news channel, his empire of power beginning to crumble as the truth emerged. Camille felt the weight of the moment, knowing that this was the final battle against the forces that had controlled the world from the shadows. But as Valen's empire began to falter, Camille knew that their work wasn't finished. There would always be those who sought to control, to manipulate. The fight for transparency and justice was never ending. The true victory, she realized, was in the fight itself, the relentless pursuit of truth, no matter how dark the road became. Epilogue: a future rewritten. With Valen's network dismantled, Camille and her team turned their attention to rebuilding once more. The world was still reeling from the revelations, but Camille remained resolute in her mission. The systems were changing, slowly but surely. Trust was being rebuilt, and the power structures that had long been taken for granted were being torn down and reformed. For Camille, the future remained uncertain. The struggle for transparency, justice, and accountability would continue. But she was no longer just fighting against an invisible enemy. She had become a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope in a world that was often dark and unforgiving. And as she stood at the front of a movement that had changed the world, Camille knew one thing for certain: the fight would never stop. But as long as she stood for the truth, as long as she refused to back down, there would always be light in the darkness.